The city where I grew up had a large Chinatown. There's a large Chinatown in the city next to where I currently live. When I was in Istanbul, they even had a Chinatown there. China currently is stealthily colonizing much of sub-Saharan Africa, but it was my recent visit to Thailand and Burma that sparked contemplation about the enduring Chinese diaspora in Southeast Asia. Often referred to as the oldest Chinese diaspora, this community significantly influences the economies of Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, the Philippines, and Thailand. And this influence is reflected in many ways, such as in the region's media. As most when arrive will notice that the kind of people that you see on TV or in ads or on magazine covers are, like in India, of a much paler complexion than the average person on the street. But in the case of Southeast Asia, it is the dominant economic position of the Chinese and the economic footprint of their diaspora community, rather than a caste system that creates this class division that you can see present in said media. But more interestingly, how does this relate? How does this Chinese diaspora relate to a recently declassified secret Pentagon study on the strengths of the Chinese people to the detriment of American foreign policy? But before we get there, in this particular video, what I'm going to do is make it a kind of compendium for the video I'm currently working on that will expand on the issues of that said recently declassified Pentagon study on China, its racism, and the difference between empire and nation state. But before that, I would also like to ask you a very large favor, my beloved viewers, of going over right now and heading on to my new Rumble channel and subscribe. Just as an FYI, I release all the videos there first before I release them anywhere else, and as well as my second channel where I will be live streaming on a regular basis in the very near future. Links are in the description. Now, to encourage you to do this, I will be having a giveaway, with the top prize being a set of Japanese Imperial Occupation Burmese currency notes that I picked up on a trip there in late 2023, with the second and third prizes being a t-shirt of your choice. Now, to win one of these prizes, just leave a comment in the Rumble version of this video with the hashtag Rangoon Yen. And if you win, all you need is an address to have the prizes sent to you. So for now, please go on over and click subscribe, and click that subscribe button on the two new channels, the Rumble channel in particular. It is very much appreciated. Hi everyone, just to let you know, I have some old favorites as well as new t-shirt designs on sale right now. Link to find them is in the description, and would like to thank you in advance, as it really does help the channel, as for years now, content like this has been put into an algorithmic black hole, as well as being demonetized. So thanks again, as well as I'm pretty sure you'll find something you will like. I spent probably around 16 months in Indonesia, and that was a number of years ago. But one of the first things I noticed was most of the local people I associated with were Chinese, in the Chinese diaspora. And to this day, most of the friends that I still have in Indonesia, besides Bali that is, are of Chinese extraction. And the very simple reason is that they were the ones that I mostly came into contact with in social settings. I remember being quite fascinated by the fact that while many of these people had never been to China and they'd never set foot in the country, they still learned how to speak Mandarin. And while giving their children a publicly used name, strangely enough, usually an English name like George, John, or Tiffany, to use outside of the home, the children, that is, the children were also given Chinese names like Fang Fang to use within the home and within the larger Chinese community. The more time I spent in Southeast Asia, the more I began to realize that there were large Chinese diasporas in virtually every country, and in all instances, they were at the top of the socio-economic ladder. What I came to learn is that most of the Chinese that live in Southeast Asia today arrived in the 19th century when the region was under European colonial rule. Large numbers of them left the British treaty port cities, and this diaspora, once settled, eventually thrived working as middlemen between the Europeans and the Southeast Asian producers and consumers. In the British-controlled Malay states, the Chinese managed the opium farms and controlled its distribution, while in Dutch Indochina, the Chinese acted as tax collectors. After some time, the Chinese got into money lending, and by the late 19th century, they began to control the internal trade regionally and much of the commerce of the countries that they resided in. While the Chinese that arrived prior to the 19th century tended to fully assimilate, it is noted by some scholars that after this time, they became progressively less assimilated. It's also important to point out the differences within the region, and the cultural assimilation in countries such as Thailand that are Buddhist are much easier, for example, than it is for Islamic countries such as Malaysia and Indonesia, as the latter two countries discourage marriage and thus family formation between Muslims and non-Muslims. In Thailand, many of the Chinese have taken Thai names and intermarried with locals, but they still, like elsewhere, retain Chinese cultural practices. But even the Thai royal family has some Chinese admixture in their family tree, and thus the Chinese in Thailand have probably assimilated in that country better than they have in any of the other surrounding nations. In Southeast Asia as a whole, many of the Chinese there create and attend their own schools, often have their own newspapers. Bangkok itself has 6 Mandarin language newspapers that are dailies, and they have created their own banks, and whenever possible or feasible, they trade within the community itself. Integration culturally with local Indonesians and Malaysians has been much more difficult, and Indonesia is said to have the blackest reputation when it comes to its record of persecution and racial violence against its Chinese minority population. What is clear is that the ethnic Chinese diaspora, at least in Southeast Asia, have a very high in-group preference in everything from marriage partners, education, to and especially business and economic interests. While these values are blasphemous and are seen as sacrilegious, as well as being held in contempt by Western and especially America's new cultural beliefs, this in-group preference has helped it become, that being the Chinese diaspora, has helped it become a very powerful group within the region. In the region as a whole, it's said that in recent years, the cultural link between the diaspora and the motherland has actually strengthened rather than weakened, as one would expect. In fact, China is actively courting its emigre population globally. And according to an expert at a Singapore-based think tank, China's rise has altered its relationship with its diaspora, enabling the country to leverage ethnic Chinese living overseas to promote its own interests. And this is the point of this presentation, that historically the Middle Kingdom has seen all of its neighboring countries as vassal states of one sort or the other, with very large and economically powerful diasporas controlling the economies in every country in the Orient. With the exception of South Korea and Japan, the combined economic clout of the Chinese in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and in Southeast Asia would rank within the top 5 globally, behind only the US, China herself, Japan, and Germany. And this is of great concern to the United States. In a recently declassified secret report, The Strategic Consequences of Chinese Racism, a Strategic Asymmetry for the United States, well, the author of this report has been redacted. What we do know is it was most certainly prepared for the legendary strategist Andrew Marshall. Marshall himself served as Director of Net Assessments at the Pentagon for 42 years under 13 Secretaries of Defense until his retirement in 2015 at the age of 93. And at that time, he was said to be the oldest federal worker ever. For their part, a Chinese general considered Marshall perhaps China's wisest foe and referred to him as Yoda. Intriguingly, nobody outside the Pentagon really knows all that much about his views, as not even secretaries of defense were allowed to keep copies of his highest level write-ups. Now, looking at the current study that is the focus of this video, the report was commissioned by Marshall, and it stresses the fact that to the Chinese, the United States used to be a strong society that the Chinese respected when it was a unicultural society defined by the centrality of Anglo-Protestant culture at the core of American national identity, aligned with the political ideology of liberalism, the rule of law, and free market capitalism. The Chinese see multiculturalism as a sickness that has overtaken the United States and a component of U.S. decline. The report continues, in truth, they are a society with considerable social capital that Harvard sociologist Robert Putnam identifies as central to the prosperity of a community. In fact, it's probably hopeless, the study continues, for the U.S. to try to undermine China by selling the sacredness of diversity to the Chinese. Now, why is this? Well, the report continues that, quote, China does not face a culture war like the one currently taking place in the United States. There is no fundamental debate about the identity of the country, the principles it embodies, who belongs, who does not, and the direction in which the country should move. And this gives the Chinese government a considerable advantage as a unicultural state in competition with the multicultural United States. In sum, it will be hard to cause a loss of confidence with the Chinese. Now, this is just a very short summary of many of the points that are made in this secret Pentagon study, and I will make a whole video on it in the very near future, but what it does emphasize, this declassified study, what it does emphasize is that China holds a significant advantage over the United States due to its characterization as more of a nation state rather than an empire, which the United States is in all but name. And interestingly, it remains uncertain whether Marshall, with his astuteness in geopolitics, intended this study as primarily a manual on how to exploit China's weaknesses, and I'll go into those weaknesses in that larger video focusing on the study, or as a veiled cautionary note regarding the growing self-destructive tendencies within America. Either way, while both countries have their strengths and weaknesses, the shadow being cast, at least regionally, in the Far East by China has only grown since the study was undertaken. Now, it should be understood that many of these countries with large Chinese diaspora have strong national identities of their own, and will at the same time, because of history, geography, and relationship networks, well, much of Asia will most likely gravitate toward closer ties with China, with the obvious exceptions being that of Japan, South Korea, and possibly Vietnam. With a global network of interrelated Chinese communities growing ever closer, it would appear that the Chinese dream that President Xi Jinping has described as the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation will be greatly assisted by the Chinese diaspora that more or less control the economies of Southeast Asia, and thus, to American frustration, most of the Orient. Thus, in conclusion, in 2024, it has to be clear to even the most casual of observers that the days of the West dictating to the rest are coming to an end. And this has been more acutely observable and very, very clear in just the past 2 years. But this trend will only continue to intensify. So then, thank you very much for watching. Please check to see that you're still subscribed, as YouTube tends to unsubscribe people by the thousands without their knowledge or consent. As well, head on to my second channel, but more importantly to my Rumble channel, and subscribe there, and leave the hashtag Rangoon Yen in the comment section for your chance to win Second World War Japanese Imperial Occupation script or a t-shirt of your choice. So again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.